Hey everybody, John Peterson here, back with another video for you, and today I want to talk a little bit about processing images and making the choice or choices of what to do with particular images. Now, you know, a lot of landscape photography in particular is more than just documenting the landscape. In my opinion, it's really used to try to impart or convey emotions, feelings, experiences, those types of more subtle, softer elements of visual communication. And, you know, our processing has so much to do with mood of images, how we choose to process it. Do we have a lot of contrast, which is, you know, would create an energetic, punchy, dynamic, startling at times image, or do we have a lot less contrast, which is calmer, subtle, relaxed, serene, introspective? All of these different ways we can take our photographs. You know, some photographs just lend themselves to particular types of processing. Other times, there's photographs that you could go either way. And, you know, when I shoot photographs in the field, I have an idea of what type of processing I want to do. Am I creating a energetic, dynamic, powerful photograph? Am I creating a subtle, introspective, relaxing photograph? Am I wanting to evoke a particular emotion in the viewer? I mean, I have ideas of what I want to do when I'm taking the photograph itself, because all of that informs my compositional choices. But today I wanted to look at a photograph and walk you through my process of editing this, because this photograph could go a couple of different ways from a processing perspective. So I wanted to walk you through my decision-making process, what I'm choosing to do, and then a little bit of how I do it. Now, I don't want to show you how specifically, in a way, because we all have our own styles for doing the physical edits themselves, but knowing what to do is much more important than knowing how to do it. All right, let's jump into the photograph and let's take a look. All right. Okay, here we go. This is the photograph that I want to work with you today on. This was shot down on the southern Oregon coast, and it's the sea stacks offshore off of Bandon Beach. You know, Bandon's a very popular spot for photography, and rightly so. It's one of the most beautiful locations on the West Coast. But so here we got this image, and the things that really attracted me to this, especially for this video as an example, are, you know, first thing is the sky. Look at the sky. The sky is absolutely beautiful. There is so much interest happening up in the sky. The clouds, I could see, you know, if I could make the sky extremely angry because there's a lot of dark tonality into the clouds, also a lot of bright tonality, so I could really push and pull a lot of contrast up there. It's a phenomenal sky for the Oregon coast, so that I loved. You know, the sea stacks themselves, because this was a bright scene, this was sunset, I knew that they were going to be silhouetted, so I composed my composition with the idea that these rocks would be almost pure black, and that I'm okay with that. I mean, there was no way for me in one exposure to get shadow detail in these rocks and not blow out the highlights in the sky. So that's cool. I love the ocean in this shot. It's kind of a dreamy ocean. I have a little bit of a longer shutter speed. It's about 1.5 seconds. And so there's enough detail, but yet there's also enough blur that you have this sort of dreamy, ethereal look to the water. The part that I really loved, though, also was the reflection here in the foreground. The warmth and color that's in this reflection is absolutely amazing. And I knew that could be a wonderful aspect or a wonderful element in my finished photograph. So this is a shot that I really love. There's a lot that can be done with this. And if you paid attention to what I just said, to contrast this, and this is why this is a great example, is that the sky could be highly energetic. It could be highly dramatic. It could be all of these things that are punchy, attention grabbing, all of that kind of stuff. So I said that about the sky. And then the lower half of this image, I talked about dreamy and ethereal and calm and those types of things. So I have this dynamic contrast in the photograph between an energetic sky and a relatively calm, relaxing foreground. So how do I process it? How do I take the pick on where to go with this? So let's jump into processing real quick. The first thing that grabs my eye is I have half a rock over here on the right-hand side. That has to go. I did a crop already. Excuse me. So there we go. There is my photograph, my base photograph of where I want to go with this. Just for fun, let's click the auto button and see what happens. Ooh. Darkened everything up. Why? Because that sky was so bright. It added a ton of yellow into this, which is horrible. So I don't like the way the artificial intelligence is thinking about this. So I need to go and do my own thing with this photograph. So I'm going to undo what I do, and that was kind of Command Z on the Mac, just undid the last little bit. But let's go up and start working on the sky. I typically start with the sky first in photographs, get that generally close to where I want it to be, and then I'll go work on the rest of the image, and then I may go back to the sky and then back to the foreground, all those types of things. So let's go ahead and do a sky mask. I'm going to do most of these edits in Lightroom to help you if you're primarily a Lightroom user. There's a few things I'll jump into Photoshop for, but let's just kind of stick to Lightroom. First off, I want to look and see about reducing the exposure just a little bit. And what that does is it really brings out more of the detail and the drama in these clouds. It knocks back a little bit of this color over here. And it just gives it a little bit more weight to it. And because the foreground is relatively dark, I want the image to be tonally balanced as much as I can, that the sky seems to be in a similar tonal range of the foreground and the midground. So let's do that. I kind of want to knock down the highlights just a little bit because we're close to clipping on a few of these cloud edges. So let's just kind of do that and live with that for now. Actually, the other edit I want to do is I want to maybe on the left-hand side of the image, it's a little bit brighter than the right. So, if you look at this, I've got all this visual information over here on the right, a little bit darker tones. Over here on the left, I have less visual information and it's lighter. So if I want to balance this a little bit closer left to right, what I could do is go in here and do a mask based upon a luminance or a color range. Let's try the luminance range for this right here. It selected a good part of the sky, and what I want to do is maybe refine this just a little bit. Take some of that stuff out of the left, isolate, or out of the right, and kind of isolate just the left. So let's take that and let's drop the exposure of that just a little bit more. And I may add just a smidge of blue in it because when I dropped the exposure, it added some gray into the color. So I may want to put back just a little bit of color back into this so it doesn't look unnatural. There we go. All right, now the foreground. Well, the easy thing for me is this bottom part of the water. Absolutely love the bottom part of this water. And I want to accentuate the warm tones of this. And so what I'm going to do is do a linear gradient down here at the bottom and just isolate the reflective portion of the water down below. I don't want a real long gradient here, so I keep this space relatively small. And then I'm going to go into the temperature slider and add some warmth into this. And you can see real quick, there's without it and there's with it. Because I feel that this bottom portion is a wonderful part of the photograph. I love this. And I love this darker horizontal line going through it, that I really want to make this eye-catching. So real quickly, you know, we've gone from this crop, we've gone from that to this. Got a lot more color, a little bit darker sky. I've got this front edge a little bit more colorful. Dare I say punchier. Yeah, so I think things are looking good. Now this water in the midground, this is where I want to spend a little bit of attention. There's a couple things we could do here. I could go into Photoshop and do a dodge and burn layer and dodge this and brighten this up a little bit in certain areas, which I may do. But for now, let's just real quick go in and do a brush. I want my flow maybe about 50%. I'll increase my brush size, and I want to paint through this a little bit. What I'd like to do is bring this area up, except for this little bright spot, but bring this up just a little bit in brightness. So I'm going to go, because there's a lot of white information in here, I'm going to take my white slider and raise that up just a smidge. So we go from that to that. That to that. And folks, you know, I really try to make things as subtle as possible when I do this. So subtle adjustments gradually build up layers. So again, we've gone from this to this. I'm still not a huge fan of how much yellow is happening up here in the sky. So I may go back and take some of this yellow out. There's different ways to do this. You know, Lightroom's not the easiest way to do it. I would go into Photoshop and do some balancing, but I can play with my temperature slider to take some of that yellow out, because I don't want the sky to over-dominate the rest of the image. If that makes sense. I want things to have equal levels of visual impact. There's so much information up in the sky that it could very easily overwhelm the rest of the photograph. So I want to make sure that I don't go over the top with that. Remember when I started the video, I was talking about how you really use our processing to accentuate or de-accentuate elements of the image and really affect the tone and the feeling for a particular photograph. And in this one, you know, as I just got done saying, I don't want the sky to over-dominate the rest of the photograph. Likewise, I want the sky to be colorful and have some dynamicism to it, but I also don't want it to be super dramatic, super punchy, super energetic. Because the bottom half of this photograph, which is really important to me, is calm, it's serene, it's somewhat dreamy. And so I walk a really fine line between having the sky just be overly dramatic and thereby, dare I say, incongruous with the bottom half of the image. You know, we can have different elements in our photographs, and if they're not harmonious, if they don't work well together, the photograph's not going to work as a whole together. And so making sure that my processing doesn't over-accentuate the sky, making that unharmonious with the rest of the photograph, is really important to me in how I process this image. So the last couple steps that I will do is just a little bit of touch up. And so I want to do kind of a dodge and burn. I'll dodge this to start with, where I want to really work on the wave fronts, the front edges of these waves. And so with a really light brush, I'll go in and I will paint certain elements of this that I want to brighten up just a smidge. And I'm using a really low flow, like 17. You could do 17 to 20. I would rather do multiple brush strokes of light opacity than one heavy brush stroke. So with that, let's just take a look at increasing the exposure just a smidge. You know, if I crank it all the way, because I don't have a lot of flow in my brush, it gives me more latitude for making adjustments on my sliders. So we go from that to that. That's without the adjustment, that's with the adjustment. Just a little bit of brightness to get some attention down into the surf. And then similarly, I want to do a burn layer. We'll keep it at 17%. And I want to darken up some of these wave fronts to bring a little bit more, just a little bit more contrast to parts of the image. And I want to work on kind of the darker, shadowier areas because I want to create some three-dimensionality in this. So let's go ahead and take my black slider. Instead of using my exposure, I want to try my black slider. I mean, it doesn't have a huge effect on it, but let's just drop our exposure just a little bit. So we go from that to that. It's very light and very subtle. You might not be able to see it on the video, but overall it adds some great contrast just in the ocean. Then the last thing I want to do is add a vignette to the image. I vignette 100% of my images, and so we'll just add a slight vignette around the edges. Not a lot because I have clouds on the border of the frame. It would really make the vignette, if I go too heavy, it'll make the vignette very, very obvious and visible. So because I have those clouds there, I can't do a really heavy vignette and make it look natural. So I'm going to keep it about 18 and go from there. So that's without the vignette and that's with the vignette. Subtle, natural. I don't want people to consciously be aware of that vignette. So there you go. There is my way of processing this particular image. We go from this, which is a fine photograph into itself, to this. A slight crop, some color, some tonality work. And for me, I feel that I've preserved the dreamy, calm feeling in the lower half of the image, yet still have brought out some of the wonderful visual details in the sky. And there you go. There's just one example of some of the thought processes I go through as I'm editing my photographs. You know, as I said at the outset, to begin, our editing can really help or hinder our photographs. You know, we can take our editing in so many different ways. But really my goal in my photographs is to have my editing mimic or be complementary to either the subjects and the scenes that I'm shooting, the mood that I felt at the time, or the emotions that I want to evoke in my viewers. And so I really work hard to have my editing be in harmony with the scene that I am working on. You know, as I showed you in this video with this image, I could have really just made this sky dramatic and punchy and crazy, but that wasn't the intent of the photograph. And I think it would have taken away from a good portion of the photograph if I would have done that. So keeping the sky toned down, bringing up the foreground interest through the use of color and tonality really made this image far more balanced than it could have been. It could have gone absolutely off the rails. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below. Don't forget, if you're not subscribed, please do so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching and have a great day.